I think this question must have been ringing in the ears of Esther. You think of some of the things that's gone on in her life at this point. This question, where is God? She was an immigrant, an orphan immigrant, raised by her cousin Mordecai, an outcast people group, the Jews, in a foreign land. As a beautiful young woman, she was taken from her home. She was forced to be a part of the king's beauty contest for his pleasure and imprisoned, in a sense, in the castle, in the king's palace. She lost her freedom. She lost her hope of love, lost the hope of a family, lost the hope of a future. And what did she win? She won a drunken party animal who made rash decisions, who loved to show off his power, who had the habit of trading in his wives when he was ready for a new model. Esther did become queen, but she was a trophy and a pawn of the king. It must have seemed like to her, where is God? Mordecai, her cousin who had raised her, gave her the advice, hide your heritage. Hide your heritage. Don't tell people you are a Jew. And she did. And she followed her rule flawlessly. She was one who pleased the king. She stood as queen, as the figure for the empire. And she quietly maintained her Jewish faith. It must have seemed like her life was a mess. It was just a bunch of knots and loose ends and untied things that she couldn't figure out. Why is what's happening? Where is God in all of this? And in the middle of all this, Esther learns that her people have been given a death sentence. The king just signed the death warrant to the Jewish people. And her family, her people, were going to be executed. Less than a year away at this point, executed. Time was ticking, and her nationality would be wiped out. And Mordecai comes to her, and he steps up to her, and he says, speak up for your people. And think about Esther at that point. She says, and I'm paraphrasing, she says, what can I do? I'm powerless. I'm just a figurehead. I'm just a trophy wife with no real power. What can I do? I've been married for 5 years at this point, and I haven't even seen the king in a month. He's not interested in me. Our fire has kind of waned, and after all, he looks for new models. I'm on borrowed time. What can I do? Xerxes hasn't asked for me, and if I go in before him to talk to him, without him calling, it's a certain death sentence for me. Remember the law. Remember Vashti. What can I do? She must have been thinking, what a mess. What a mess. Where is God? Have you ever felt like your life was a bunch of dead-end knots and loose ends? Maybe a little bit like this. The back of a tapestry with just strings going everywhere and knots in wrong places, seemingly no order, just visual disorder. I think sometimes our lives can feel like this picture. We often see the problems. We're quick to see the failures and the difficulties. We're quick to get stuck in the knot and can't see anything beyond it. Have you ever looked at the news and felt powerless to correct the darkness of our culture or fix the wild political situation that we're in? Have you ever felt like your vote was small and the problems were huge? Have you felt powerless? Maybe you've had a teacher or coach that you just can't get a break with. It just doesn't seem to be working out. Maybe you've put a lot into a certain subject. You've just invested so much time and study, and it just doesn't seem to click. You're just not making it. You just can't make the cut. Maybe you have an unfair boss or coworkers that just don't seem to understand you, or maybe feel like they're working against you even. Perhaps a relationship that is broken, and you've done everything you can possibly think to do, and you just can't fix it. We often live in a mess. And we see the knots, we see the loose strings, we see the problems. We feel powerless and sometimes hopeless. So what did Esther do? I think Esther must have been thinking, our fate is hopeless, and yet Mordecai's words keep ringing in her ears too. What if? Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? What if you're exactly the person at exactly the time that God has right where you're at? Right for what's going on right now in your life, your family's life, your community's life, your nation's life. What if you're exactly the person that's there for such a time as this? And that's ringing in Esther's ear too. See, what if God was already there? Always there? What if Esther was one of his fingerprints? She could have hid. She was powerless after all. She could have just been quiet. What does she do? Let's take a look at that. If you join me in Esther chapter 5, and we're going to be on page 411 in the chair Bible. If you don't have a Bible, or you have a friend that doesn't have a Bible, we'd love you to take the Bible as our gift. You'll find one right in your row, and I'm going to be in several chapters of the book of Esther today. We're going to start in chapter 5. So if you join me there. What did Esther do in the face of insurmountable odds? She asked Mordecai and all the Jews in the capital city to fast with her for 3 days. I think her first reaction was, I can't do this. And her second reaction is, okay, let's fast. And that was connected with prayer. Let's go to God. She says, I'll go. And if I must die, then I must die. That's faith. We're about to run into some twists and turns in the next couple chapters. So as we mount this roller coaster, just go ahead and buckle up and let's dive in. Verse 1, on the third day of the feast, Esther put on her royal robes and she entered the inner court of the palace, just across from the king's hall. See, Esther didn't stay quiet. She embraced her place as queen. And not as most desirable female in the empire. That wasn't what she embraced. She embraced the place of queen of an empire. She puts on the royal robes. She enters the court, her husband's place. She's wading into deep waters. This isn't her realm. But she steps up and she walks in. The king was sitting on his royal throne facing the entrance. And what do we know about that law? He didn't ask her to come in there. If he just stays still, she dies. Execution on the spot. If he raises out the scepter, she lives. The tension, I think, mounts. Verse 2, when he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her. He held out the gold scepter. So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. Whew. The first danger's out of the way, right? He allows her to come in. And rather than immediate execution, he welcomes her. His heart melts. He sees his girl and he says, come. Esther, I think, is embracing the message of Isaiah the prophet just not many years earlier. And he says, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Speaking for God. God is with you. He says, don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. And so Esther can take that step in, and I think she believes that God is with her. She can take the step of faith, and God helped her.